I am a socialist with some hints of Marxism, anarchism, and a bit of Buddhist and Christian spirituality. So am I happy that we have a new Labour government? The answer is no, not really. The Daily Telegraph would suggest that I should be happy. In a few recent articles, we've got statements like how to enjoy life in socialist Britain, Britain's socialist future, socialist Starmer. We have a new government, but I don't feel very positive about it. I don't feel there's much in it for a socialist. Prior to the election, I did a video on the empty rhetoric of all the politicians and how I found the main parties really disappointing. I made the argument that the new Labour government would be merely a change of management. I must admit that the video was particularly negative, but that was what I was feeling. I still feel this, and I'm going to tell you why. Now, I'm not a negative person. I do look for the positives. And so I'm going to do a quick pros and cons of the new UK government for a socialist like me. So come on, let's make an effort and try and identify some of the economic positives from Labour getting into power. I think I can come up with 4 main points. I'm not 100% convinced, but all points do have merit, and I'm going to present them as positively as I can. The first point is that the new Labour government is definitely a change in tone. There are no more right-wingers in the government. We've moved away from the unpleasant right-wing rhetoric. We've heard some horrible things over the years, some really inhumane things on immigration, on mental illness, on human rights. Already we're hearing more compassionate, inclusive language from Labour in these areas. We need solutions for these problems. Improving the way we treat people will have a positive effect on productivity and will ultimately really help the economy. It amazes me that there isn't more recognition of the fact that if you treat people inhumanely, they become unproductive. Also, there are other important changes in tone. Changes on climate change, changes in tone towards the European Union. The latter could pave the way for improved trade relations with the EU and cooperation on key issues. So the second positive is that we will have a stable government for the next 5 years. This is a massive positive after years of political turmoil and infighting, the revolving door of prime ministers and chancellors. Labour is more cohesive, and this is a breath of fresh air. Starmer will almost certainly be in power for 5 years, and this brings a level of certainty to the economy, which we haven't had since the 2016 Brexit referendum. This stability is good for business. The third positive is that Labour is bringing some new and fresh ideas on critical policy issues, on planning, on prisons, on workers' rights, on movements towards nationalisation of key public services, rail and energy, etc. In this regard, Labour's made some interesting appointments. The appointment of the CEO of Simpsons as prisons minister. This is interesting because he's known for really progressive employment practices in relation to employing ex-offenders and his belief in providing people with a second chance. It'll be really interesting to see what he does on prison reform. Also, we have the appointment of a human rights lawyer as Attorney General. This seems like a really positive move. The fourth positive is that we will have some tax increases to help deal with the crisis that the UK economy faces. We'll have the VAT on private schools, and there will be some increased taxes on the wealthy, the so-called non-DOMs. But this is all very moderate, but it is in the right direction. The Labour Party haven't ruled out other taxes on wealth, and probably they will make the system of capital gains taxation fairer, for example. They have given themselves some scope for increasing revenue to finance their new agenda. So that's about as much I can come up with in terms of positives for the new Labour government. it really doesn't feel like very much. I must say that the negatives do feel stronger. This doesn't really feel like a new economic start for me. So let's just take a quick look at some of the cons. Why am I not happy at this new Labour government? And I've got 3 key points to make here. Point 1, this is not a socialist government. Nowhere near. Starmer is not a socialist. Who knows what he is? He was a Marxist as a young man. He was a strong supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, but he now has the attitude that Corbyn is the worst thing that ever happened to the Labour Party. He currently appears to be a full-on Blairite. To the extent that we can identify an ideology, it would be neoliberalism with a tint of social conscience. There's no substantial differences with the previous Conservative government. The positives that I identify are limited and extremely moderate. Labour has shifted firmly to the centre. Starmer could easily have been in the Sunak cabinet, just like Blair and Mandelson. From a socialist perspective, therefore, Labour is now a centre party again. The unity that I mentioned has only come about because of a purge of those that are too openly left. I can't forgive Starmer for this. I really don't appreciate this authoritarian, disciplinarian approach to the Labour Party. The Blairites are now fully in charge. We've really seen this in the treatment of the 7 MPs that voted in favour of the amendment to remove the 2-child benefit cap in the past few days. What we don't know is how many left-wingers are towing the line, but may be more vocal from the back benches in the coming years. There are a lot of new Labour MPs. Many have made the argument that it's better to get into power and move to the left once in power. However, this will not happen. The Blair-Starmer Labour Party is a centre party, not socialist. It's equivalent to the left of the Conservative Party. It's broadly equivalent to Tories such as Sunak, Hunt and Theresa May. Even if this wasn't true and Labour was to try to shift to the left, there's a massive constraint. The impact of reform and the Tory right provide a right-wing drag on Labour's ability to implement change. The right-wing media will give Labour a very hard time if they try to move to the left. Labour can potentially be in power a long time if they don't cause too much trouble to the establishment and they stay in the centre. The second point relates to the so-called fiscal rules and how this will severely limit what Labour can do. Labour is so keen to prove themselves as financially conservative as the Conservatives. They've committed to the previous government's fiscal rules that debt must be reducing as a percentage of GDP in 5 years. And the implication of this, as it currently stands, is that spending will have to be cut or taxes increased. In effect, under Labour's current plans, we're going to have austerity almost as austere as the Conservatives. Labour will have to make cuts on current plans. This is not just me saying this. The Office for Budget Responsibility, in talking about the previous government, said that current finance plans are a work of fiction and that there'll have to be real cuts in key public services. The Institute for Government also said that the previous government's spending plans were implausible. Now, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, commissioned an audit of shortfalls in current government spending plans, and this is going to include that there is a hole in the public finances. We already knew this. Currently, Labour has similar fiscal plans to the Tories, so the changes that they're proposing are extremely moderate, and Labour hasn't said how it will deal with this, apart from a blind hope that somehow significant economic growth will magically occur and will solve the problem. The FT recently reported that IMF staff estimates show that growth would have to be 2.6% per year between 2025 and 2029 to avoid tax rises or spending cuts. This compares with estimated growth of around 0.4% to 0.7% for 2024 and 1 to 1.5% in 2025. We've had a decade of sluggish growth, of low productivity. This isn't suddenly going to change without some radical policies. Now, Labour have some positives in relation to taxes and spending, but they're really modest. They're only incremental improvements. I just cannot see how Labour can get these kind of growth figures based on current problems. Is it possible that Labour will increase taxes more than they said? This is what we need. The country isn't paying its way. We need to ask the super rich to pay more through a wealth tax. Labour have tinkered with the tax on non-doms, but in the election campaign, Labour didn't rule out some form of wealth taxes. They definitely won't increase income tax, so most people won't be affected, and that's right, I think. But they didn't rule out an increase in capital gains tax. This will improve the situation somewhat. But I do have a fear that there isn't a mandate to increase taxes. So increasing taxes too much, Labour is just going to be crucified by the right-wing press. If Labour were going to significantly increase taxes, this needed to be sold to the public, but I think it'll be difficult now. Starmer has got into power by making himself an acceptable plan B for the neoliberal establishment. He only has so much scope to adopt left-wing policies. He will have to continue neoliberal policies, even austerity policies, but with a slightly more sympathetic attitude towards social issues. The current problems faced by the UK are so big, and I've done a separate video on the crisis in the UK economy. We need a radical plan of recovery for the country, reversing damage of decades of neoliberalism. Labour's plan is nowhere near the new economic start we need. The third area of concern I have is about the role of business. Labour has big ambitions on NHS, on energy, on prisons, on housing, but they're just not proposing anywhere near enough money for the government to do anything significant in these areas. My fear is that they see the answer to these problems as bringing in business. Now, in my view, essential services should be provided by government. That's where we've been going wrong for decades. There's a problem when firms are focused on profit and shareholders rather than on the public good. Labour can't afford to provide much better public services and infrastructure. Their only choice is to go for business solutions to public services, government partnerships with business, basically continued neoliberal economics, cheap in the short run, but long run, the private sector cannot be trusted, as we've seen in water, energy, railways, and the list goes on. Overall, I'm trying to be open-minded and not just be negative. It is good that we have the Tories out, thank goodness. Whether things improve beyond this tinkering of the Labour Party remains to be seen. I feel very pessimistic on this. Labour's plan feels like a drop in the ocean compared to what we need. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.